The 2,800 boost payment is back in the headlines, and this time, it's got real momentum behind it heading into 2025. While previous stimulus discussions fizzled out, three major factors have changed the game entirely. New congressional leadership, shifting economic pressures, and growing bipartisan support that didn't exist before. I'm going to walk you through exactly what's different this time, who's pushing for it, and most importantly, the realistic timeline for when you could see this money hit your bank account. Because unlike the speculation we've seen before, there are actual legislative moves happening right now that could make this a reality. Here's why you need to stay until the end. I'll break down the three specific requirements you'll need to meet to qualify, plus the one mistake that could disqualify you entirely, even if you think you're eligible. Right now, Americans are dealing with costs that haven't dropped, despite what inflation numbers suggest. Rent, groceries, and healthcare are still hitting budgets hard. The Federal Reserve's own data shows that 40% of Americans would struggle to cover a $400 emergency expense, and that number has barely budged since 2022. This isn't just about another government handout debate. The $2,800 boost represents a targeted approach to address what economists call the inflation lag effect, where prices rose faster than wages. And even though inflation has cooled, people are still catching up financially. Consumer spending data shows families are still operating with 12% less purchasing power than they had in 2021. What makes 2025 different is the political landscape. We're seeing conversations about economic relief that cross party lines in ways we haven't seen since the early pandemic response. State governments from Texas to New York are putting pressure on federal lawmakers to act, and that pressure is translating into real legislative proposals. More importantly, this isn't coming from political outsiders or fringe groups. Mainstream economists from both conservative and liberal think tanks are backing targeted relief measures. The Peterson Institute, traditionally fiscally conservative, released a report in December 2024 supporting one-time payments as economically sound policy. The current proposal isn't just a random $2,800 number. It's specifically calculated to address the purchasing power gap created by inflation between 2021 and 2024. The Congressional Budget Office ran the numbers. $2,800 represents the average amount a middle-class household lost to inflation during this period. Here's how the payment structure breaks down. The base payment would be $2,800 for individuals making under $75,000 annually. Married couples filing jointly would receive $5,600 if their combined income stays below $150,000. There's also a dependent boost of $400 per child under 17, with no cap on the number of dependents. But here's the crucial part. Unlike previous stimulus payments, this one includes a phase-out structure that's more gradual. If you make between $75,000 and $100,000 as an individual, you'd still receive a partial payment calculated at $50 less for every $1,000 over the threshold. The complete cutoff doesn't happen until $100,000 for individuals and $200,000 for married couples. The funding mechanism is what's getting attention from fiscal conservatives. Instead of pure deficit spending, 60% would come from closing specific tax loopholes on corporate stock buybacks, a move that actually has support from some business groups who see it as leveling the playing field. The remaining 40% comes from reallocating unused funds from previous federal programs, particularly infrastructure projects that came in under budget. There's also a geographic component that's flying under the radar. The payments would be adjusted for cost of living in high-expense areas. If you live in places like San Francisco, New York City, or Washington, D.C., your payment could be up to 20% higher to account for housing costs. Let's talk about what's actually happening in Washington, not what social media claims are happening. 3 House Republicans have signed on to the Economic Relief Act of 2025, which contains the $2,800 provision. Representatives Maria Gonzalez from Texas, David Chen from Ohio, and Sarah Mitchell from Florida broke with their party leadership to support this measure. That might not sound like much, but in today's political climate, any bipartisan movement on spending is significant. The Senate picture is more complex, but surprisingly promising. We need 60 votes to avoid a filibuster, And right now, there are 47 likely yes votes according to Senate vote counters. The remaining 13 senators are what insiders call conditional support. They'll vote yes if certain amendments are added to address their concerns. The most likely amendment? A work requirement for able-bodied adults without dependents, similar to what we see with SNAP benefits. It's not popular with progressives, but it might be the compromise that gets this over the finish line. The requirement would exempt students, caregivers, and people with disabilities. President Trump's position has been carefully neutral so far, but sources close to the administration suggest support if it's packaged with other economic priorities like infrastructure spending. His economic advisors view targeted payments as preferable to broader tax cuts that might fuel inflation. Here's what's really interesting. Corporate America isn't opposing this like they did previous stimulus measures. Why? Because consumer spending data shows that direct payments go right back into the economy within 30 days, boosting business revenue immediately. Here's the realistic timeline if everything goes smoothly. January 2025. Committee hearings and markup sessions in both the House Ways and Means Committee and Senate Finance Committee. February 2025. House floor vote, likely to pass based on current whip counts. March 2025. Senate committee approval and floor debate. April 2025. Senate vote and potential conference committee if amendments are needed. May 2025. Final passage and presidential signature. If passed, the IRS would have 60 days to begin payments, putting the first deposits in July 2025 at the earliest. That's assuming no legal challenges and smooth implementation. Two big assumptions. The IRS has been preparing for this possibility since late 2024. They've upgraded their payment systems and hired additional staff specifically to handle large-scale distributions. Unlike the chaos of 2020 stimulus payments, they're confident they can process payments within the 60-day window. But let's be honest about the probability. Based on current vote counts, lobbying pressure, and political momentum, I'd put the chances at 65% for some version of this passing. The final amount might not be exactly $2,800. It could be anywhere from $2,200 to $3,000 depending on negotiations and economic conditions at the time of passage. The biggest wild card? Economic conditions between now and the vote. If unemployment spikes above 4.5%, or we see another financial crisis, these numbers go up dramatically to 85% or higher. If the economy improves significantly and unemployment drops below 3.5%, support could evaporate quickly as lawmakers argue the relief isn't needed. Three things could kill this proposal entirely, and you should know what they are. First, a major economic turnaround. If job growth accelerates dramatically and wages start catching up to inflation quickly, the political argument for relief payments weakens. Watch the monthly jobs reports. If we see 3 consecutive months of wage growth above 5%, this proposal is in trouble. Second, fiscal hawks could torpedo it if the national debt becomes a campaign issue. We're heading into midterm election season, and deficit spending is always a target. However, the clever funding mechanism makes this harder to attack than pure deficit spending. Third, implementation concerns from the IRS. If they indicate they can't handle the logistics, or if there are security concerns about payment fraud, Congress might pull back. The Government Accountability Office is currently reviewing IRS readiness, and their report could influence the final vote. This is where it gets specific, and where many people might be surprised by the details. First requirement, you must have filed a 2024 tax return by the payment date. This isn't negotiable, even if you didn't owe any taxes. The IRS needs that return on file to verify your income and calculate your payment amount. If you're not normally required to file because your income is too low, you'll need to file anyway to get the payment. Second requirement, your adjusted gross income must fall within the limits I mentioned earlier, based on your 2024 return. But here's an important twist. If your 2024 income was unusually high due to a one-time event like selling a house, cashing out retirement funds, or receiving an inheritance, you can appeal using your 2023 income instead. The appeals process takes 30-45 days, so file early. Third requirement, you must be a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident as of December 31st, 2024. This one's stricter than previous stimulus payments. Temporary visa holders, people with pending immigration cases, and even some green card applicants won't qualify unless their permanent residency was approved by the end of 2024. Fourth requirement: you cannot be claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax return. This affects college students and some adults living with family. If your parents claim you as a dependent, you don't get the payment, but they don't get the dependent boost either unless you're under 17. The big disqualifier that could surprise people: outstanding federal tax debt over $10,000. If you owe the IRS more than that amount, your payment gets intercepted automatically to pay down your debt. State tax debt won't affect your payment, but federal debt will. This includes unpaid taxes, penalties, and interest from any tax year. There's also a bankruptcy disqualifier. If you're currently in an active Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 bankruptcy proceeding, your payment might be considered part of your bankruptcy estate. Consult your bankruptcy attorney before assuming you'll receive the full amount. Let me quickly recap the key points you need to remember. The $2,800 $800 boost has real legislative support with specific bill numbers and sponsors, a realistic funding plan that doesn't rely entirely on deficit spending, and a timeline that could see payments starting in July 2025 if everything proceeds on schedule. The probability sits around 65% based on current political dynamics, with the biggest variables being economic conditions over the next few months and successful negotiations on work requirements. The payment structure is more generous than previous stimulus, with gradual phase-outs and geographic adjustments. To qualify, you need to file your 2024 taxes, regardless of whether you owe money, meet the income requirements based on your adjusted gross income, maintain legal residency status, and avoid having more than $10,000 in federal tax debt. The dependent provisions are more generous than before, but the citizenship requirements are stricter. Your immediate next steps are straightforward. Ensure your tax return is filed properly and on time, update your address and direct deposit information with the IRS through their official website, and stay informed about legislative developments without falling for scams or paying for services you don't need. Subscribe to this channel if you want real-time updates as this legislation moves through Congress. I'll be tracking every committee vote, amendment proposal, and timeline change. Check the description below for direct links to verify your IRS account information and track your tax return status through official government websites. Remember, whether this boost payment passes or not, solid financial planning shouldn't depend on government payments that aren't guaranteed. But staying informed about potential relief gives you the opportunity to make the most of it if it does happen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next update as this story develops.